Hello everyone! This is Jen and I make useful English lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary concepts and more to help you become a literary expert. So in today's video, we are analysing another one of Hamlet's most iconic speeches, which is the Alas, poor Yorick monologue in Act 5, Scene 1 of the play, otherwise known as the graveyard scene, because it's the moment where Hamlet and Horatio encounter two gravediggers, one of whom hands Hamlet the skull he has just dug up, which Hamlet recognises as belonging to one of his late father's court jesters, Yorick. So the men then get into a philosophical discussion about the nature of life and death, and specifically how death is an equalising force that humbles even the most powerful and influential men, because even kings and queens, or nowadays presidents and prime ministers, must ultimately return to dust at the point of death. No more and no less different from the common man or the street beggar. And this, of course, is the standard line of interpretation and one that is perfectly reasonable. But as always, if you're watching Jen's channel, you're here to push interpretative boundaries and explore new, refreshing ways of reading literature together with me. So in the rest of this video, I'm going to propose looking at this moment from a slightly different angle. And instead of settling for the more standard, pessimistic reading, I argue that, on the contrary, Hamlet's allusion to Yorick and great historical figures like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar here proves that death isn't, in fact, the ultimate endpoint. And while it may consign man's body to dust, it doesn't hold power over our memory and legacy, both which outlast our physical presence on Earth. And with that, let's dive straight into my close reading with the first point. Now, throughout the play, Hamlet seems to veer between two emotional extremes. In his quieter moments, he is pensive and philosophical, but in his more agitated states, he can be histrionic and melodramatic. This speech, where he recalls Yorick's past presence at his late father's court and the nostalgic times in his childhood when Yorick would carry him on the shoulder in affectionate play, is interesting in that it features Hamlet in both his melodramatic and philosophical states. As Hamlet laments, "Alas, poor Yorick," while examining the jester's skull, he launches into an epiplexis, which is a rapid succession of rhetorical questions asked to express grief or anger. "How abhorred in my imagination it is! My gorge rises at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now? Your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment, that were wont to set the table on a roar? Not one now, to mock your own grinning? Quite chapfallen?" Now, Hamlet's tone here seems a mix of anguish, incredulity, and even a hint of scorn, as if he can't quite accept the drastic contrast between that jovial, lively Yorick that he remembers from his childhood and the man's grim, chapfallen, because, well, dead, bodily remnants in this moment. It's almost as if Hamlet blames, however irrationally, Yorick for having given him such vivid, happy memories and yet appearing now in this frightful, morbid state. His memory of Yorick is strong, suggested by both the sharp, sensorial imagery of "my gorge rises at it" and "those lips that I've kissed," as well as the visceral plosive sounds in jibes, gambols, table, grinning. Now, this suggests that Hamlet craves to replay and relive those sounds and sensations of the specific flashes of merriment in his mind. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. This struggle with reconciling contradictory or opposite notions is very much aligned with Hamlet's personality throughout the play, as we would have seen from other speeches like, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt" from Act 1, Scene 2, when he deplores Gertrude's grieving over his father's death and a quick remarriage to his uncle, or when Hamlet bemoans "what a piece of work is a man" in Act 2, Scene 2, and wonders how humans could be equally noble and base. And by the way, if you haven't watched my analysis on those two speeches, you can check that out right here. But anyway, going back to this Yorick speech, what's remarkable is how strikingly sentimental Hamlet recalls his moments with Yorick. And in his detailed emotional recollection of Yorick's cheerful demeanour and his joyous impact at court, he cements the personal significance of the socially insignificant jester, even if it is a significance held only in Hamlet's own private history. It is not so, then, that death is such an all-erasing force, because even if one leaves the earth in their physical form as Yorick has, they remain in the minds and memories of others. So, by dint of our involvement and energy in other people's lives, we, just like Yorick, can outlive the seeming termination of death. Now, if Hamlet's memory preserves Yorick's dignity, then it is somewhat ironic that the prince should ask, "Why may not imagination trace the noble dust of Alexander till he find it stopping a bunghole?" i.e., Alexander the Great doesn't so much appeal to my mind as he exists as a piece of material that's now used for lowly purposes like plugging a hole in a barrel. Now, Yorick, at least in Hamlet's mind, holds far greater meaning than Alexander the Great or the imperious Julius Caesar. This reinforces a central idea in the speech, which is that no matter how high or low, famous or mundane, great or trivial one might have been in their lifetime, everyone is leveled at the point of death. And as Hamlet alludes to great men like Alexander and Caesar, his syntax suggests that as he speaks, he is convincing himself of this premise, which makes sense because he is a prince. When he goes, "Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth into dust. The dust of earth we make loam, and why of that loam whereto he was converted? Might they not stop a beer barrel?" Now, there's almost a sense that Shakespeare here is echoing Caesar's famed dictum, "I came, I saw, I conquered," with a similar triple asyndeton of Alexander died, Alexander was buried, Alexander returneth into dust. Now, if this is the case, then it's an ironic twist on the original. Because while Caesar's statement is a proud declaration of a unique individual's mighty greatness, Hamlet's description of Alexander is the opposite. A matter-of-fact acknowledgement of the ontological disintegration and eventual vanishing that happens not just to one great man, but to every man when they die. The triple repetition of the name Alexander replicates the one and only Alexander the Great into carbon copies, and therefore linguistically undercutting this great man's uniqueness and conveying the idea that every Tom, Dick, and Harry is in effect just another Alexander at their point of death, having to go through the same process of dying, being buried, and returning to dust. Which is here an allusion, and this phrase is an allusion to the book of Genesis, thus implying that in death we come full circle back to the point of creation. And speaking of circles, the sequence of returneth into dust, the dust is of earth we make loam, and why of that loam, with its chain-like anadiplosis of dust the dust, earth of earth, loam of that loam, strengthens the idea that death does not have to be viewed as a terminal point in existence, nor should life be seen as a teleological linear construct that begins at birth and concludes at our bodily death. Life and death are fluid states in a cycle of consciousness, and our physical lifetime, i.e. the period during which we are alive, is just one stage from which we'll move into another, where the imprint of our actions while alive will live on. So just as we move from dust to earth to loam, we simply travel from life to death to various forms of afterlife, whether this afterlife be manifested in grand historical legacy like that of Alexander and Caesar, or just in a fond personal memory like Yorick's kindness towards Hamlet in his childhood. A final observation to make about the speech is the sudden onset of rhyming couplets after Hamlet alludes to Caesar, when he says, "Imperious Caesar, dead and turned to clay, might stop a hole to keep the wind away. Oh, that earth which kept the world in awe should patch a wall to expel the winter flaw." Now, there's an odd mismatch in register between the gravitas of the event described, which is the death and memorialization of a great Roman military leader, and the flippancy in Hamlet's tone, most obviously reflected in those rhyming couplets of clay away or floor, or the slant rhyme of or wall, or internal rhyme of wall floor. Now, the string of rhymes creates an impression of levity that seems to make light of what's otherwise a grave topic, death. But perhaps that's precisely the point that Shakespeare is trying to make here, which is that there's no need to view death through such a heavy, depressing lens, because it's not really a cause for mourning. In fact, far from disrespecting the memory of a great man like Caesar, this approach to seeing death with a touch of humour may be Hamlet's coping mechanism for dealing with the loss of his own father, the late King Hamlet, whom he clearly views as a great man of similar, if not even equal, stature to Caesar. So once again then, we see that through Hamlet's emotional filtering and logical processing, we are invited to reframe and see anew a fossilized concept like death, which most people would take for granted to imply finality and sadness, but now realize could just as equally signal rebirth, cyclicality, and an existential rite of passage. And there you go, guys. That's my analysis of Hamlet's Alas, Poor Yorick speech from Act 5, Scene 1 of the play. I hope you found this interpretation insightful and useful, and that it's given you some refreshing ideas to consider for your next Hamlet essay. Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you think as always, because this is obviously a really deep and complex passage that's open to lots of interpretation. So I'm really excited to hear what you guys think. For your next video, I recommend that you watch my analysis on Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be soliloquy from Act 3, Scene 1, which is probably the most famous speech in all of English literature, and not something that you can escape from, especially if you're studying the play. And you can check that out right here. You can click the join button below to be part of my membership program if you want personalized essay feedback, makes exclusive video requests, and access members-only content. Please hit the thumbs up button below if you found this video helpful in any way, so that I'll be encouraged to keep making these weekly study videos for you and other passionate lit learners all around the world. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you never miss out on my weekly study videos down the line. And I will see you, as always, in the next one. Bye!